Hello, welcome to Boomstick Gaming, and today I have something quite special because my two favorite worlds have collided, the gaming industry and the skateboard industry, which brings us now to the early release of Session. I normally have a pretty strict non-early access coverage rule on the channel since I prefer consuming games when they're content complete myself, but since this is already turning out to be the ultimate skateboarding sim that I've always wanted for roughly 15 years now, I decided I really have to show it off. Something I don't really discuss much here at Boomstick Gaming is my love for skateboarding, which I've done for roughly 20 years up to this point, and I continue to watch video parts still almost every day. I was growing up right at the start of the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater era, which were awesome games in their own right, but once I started to get more and more ingrained into the nuances of skating, I wanted something a little more realistic and tangible that felt more in line with the real challenge of attempting tricks, rather than simply pressing buttons to make them magically happen. This then led into the EA Skate era, which started on the right foot, but quickly devolved back onto the side of silliness in later installments, and the chances of me ever getting that hardcore skateboarding sim that I always dreamed about started to feel like a lost cause. Now, in 2019, we are presented with Session, a skateboarding sim designed from the ground up for skaters, which focuses on the core fundamentals of what makes skating so enthralling. Session has an incredibly challenging but rewarding trick system, while also giving you an amazingly detailed city that attempts to satisfy the inner desire that skaters often have, which is endlessly seeking out new and interesting ways to express their creativity in any given concrete habitat they occupy. First, I want to show off how the core controls work to give you somewhat of a feel for it, since the main appeal of a game like this is the fluidity and responsiveness of the controls. If you're coming from the EA Skate series, much of your muscle memory will now actively work against you because turning in Session is mapped to the right and left triggers, which frees up both analog sticks, which are now your left and right foot, respectively. Tricks are done by inputting the associated movement of both feet to pop and flick at the same time, which again, to compare to EA Skate, if you took all the inputs you would do normally with just the right stick, now just imagine that spread out across two separate sticks, and you have a pretty decent idea on how this works. The manuals in the game require you to hover the analog input around the halfway point, but don't require a ton of balance once you lock into them. I'm not sure how you could make this feel more realistic without adopting some kind of gyro control, but it's probably better without something like that. Now, the game is already quite difficult to try to master, but if you want the ultimate nuanced skateboarding realism, you can turn on an option that requires you to actually catch all of your tricks, which is a key element to learning flip tricks that is often not reflected in video games. With this on, you essentially just raise the skill ceiling of the entire game by about 8 floors, and it was smart to make this optional to not completely alienate the more casual gamers who might want to give this game a try. Overall, in the control department, it feels really solid to play, and the difference in my skill level from day 1 compared to day 2 was a very noticeable advancement, which feels in line with actually trying to learn skateboarding, only hyper streamlined obviously. Something that never seems to translate well when simply watching skateboarding games is how technical and difficult these tricks can really be to pull off in game. Some of these clips that you've seen just fly by in a matter of seconds took 20, 30, or up to 50 tries, not too unlike a real day of filming. In this regard, setting out to go for specific tricks on certain obstacles is the primary way to play Session, at least during the early goings before you really master the physics, because it's simply that hard to casually skate around busting tricks around the city like you normally would do in a more arcadey skateboarding game. The controls in Session require a delicate touch and plenty of patience, which might end up being somewhat frustrating for casual players who want to simply dive in and tray flip smith grind something, because that will not be the case here. If you're not willing to practice up and try specific tricks over and over until you're satisfied with your consistency, then you might find the intimidating skill ceiling of Session to be quite the hurdle. Of course, everything I just mentioned should all be music to the ears of core skaters wanting something more along the lines of a sim, but it's still something to consider before jumping in. At this point in early access, you don't necessarily have a traditional campaign or really much to pursue outside of your own personal improvement and a few historical trick challenges hidden throughout the city. This turns the current experience of Session into more of a really fun skateboarding video editor, where creating your own clips from around the city, just like real skating, is often your prime motivation. Luckily, the rewind camera is in a pretty good state already, and it's easy to get a really nice angle on your tricks and save them for later. Another cool feature that I have only passively shown in the video but haven't talked about yet is your ability to create new spots by placing down a few basic props like plywood, small kickers, rails, ledges, and even lights. I really enjoyed using these to make spots skatable that would otherwise not be possible, which also just so happens to be my favorite thing to do in real life, which translates quite well here. Although right now you have a very limited amount of these that you can place, what is cool about this is that all of your spawned objects will stay in place even after you quit the game, which allows you to slowly shape the city into your own personalized playground. This gives you much more player agency over the city, and it was a smart design choice to refrain from making everything perfectly skatable from the get-go, because it allows for that creative side of skaters to really shine through with how they choose to tackle this city. Level design is just as important as the trick system itself in a skateboarding sim, and in this regard, even in its unfinished state, the devs have already crafted the best skateboarding environment ever made. Lastly, I want to talk about some of my hopes I have for Session as it continues to evolve while it's in early access. You probably already noticed, but I didn't have any grab tricks in this footage, and that's because the grabs are currently in an experimental phase of development and can come across a little janky in their current state. Also, obviously these weird mannequin-looking player models are simply placeholders, and the sooner we get some semi-realistic looking humans on these boards, the better. Not necessarily for playing, but definitely for those replays. For the overall campaign, if they choose to implement one, I would prefer the game staying away from a scoring system, since that goes against the entire point of skating, and I would like to see the objectives focus on performing certain tricks on certain obstacles, or anything that rewards you for consistency rather than just mashing buttons. I'm really enjoying my time with Session, and I've not had the hours simply just melt by as quick as they do in this with any other game that I've played this year. I just so happen to be the key demographic for this style of game, and it's hard to know how all of this translates to a gamer with a more passing interest in skateboarding, but just like all those farming, truck driving, and train simulators out there, people are obviously willing to try to virtually learn something new that they would never do in real life. On a side note, it's kind of interesting to think about, but the years of skateboarding actually influenced a large amount of how I go about making every single video on this channel, because skating really helped me understand the entire capture and editing process. For example, a common thing you would do when filming skating is to put your hand in front of the lens after something of note happened, so when you went home to extract out the good footage, all you would have to do is fast forward till you saw the screen go dark, and this would save you tons of time to not have to sift through hours of footage. When capturing gaming for a video I'm working on, I actually never usually have files that are over 1 minute in length, because I always use the flashback or rewind feature in my capture programs to only save the exact moments that will make it in the final edit, which is somewhat of a similar concept. This essentially means that I never have any B-roll on this channel, and everything I choose to show you was meticulously handpicked. This really helps with the speed in which I can throw together an entire video, and I think my edit process is all the more effective thanks to skateboarding. If you want to try out Session for yourself, I will put a link to it in the description, but always go into early access with the mindset that you are not buying into an early game, you are willing to help fund and test an ongoing project, and if you're not okay with that, then simply add Session to your wish list and await the full release to consume it all at once. If you happen to enjoy my style of content and appreciate the attention to detail I put into my videos, consider subscribing to the channel, clicking that little bell icon if you already are, and also you can follow me on Twitter at BoomstickAlex. Lastly, I want to especially thank these top supporting YouTube members and patrons who greatly helped with this month's upkeep of this individually owned and operated channel. As always, this has been Alex from Boomstick Gaming, and I appreciate you watching this all the way to the end. Thank you.